There we go. The clock has ticked over to 10:30. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Professional Snowfighters Association's webinar. Today's fireside chat is about From Response to Resilience, talking about how data empowers public works during emergencies. Joined this morning by Eric Faulkner from Weissler. I think we may also have Nicole Parker from Weissler joining us in a little while. But also, most importantly, we have Mike Duffy from the city of Cedar Rapids, just up the road. Mike has lived through and survived a number of interesting disasters that the weather of Iowa has thrown Cedar Rapids' way. And so he'll be sharing some of his insights in that regard. My name is Wilf Nixon. I'm with Professional Snowfighters Association. And then just a reminder about whose today's sponsors are. We have the Professional Snowfighters Association, but we also very grateful to have Weissler Inc. They're a founding titanium sponsor of the Professional Snowfighters Association, and they have been helping and supporting us through the years as we've come to this point in time. So I think at this point, no, it's not time for a poll. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing and going to turn it over to Eric, who will, yes, be able to share, and we will do some polling. Don't worry, we're going to ask you all sorts of questions as we go along. And in the meantime, Eric is going to take us through some things. Go for it, Eric.
Can you guys see it?
Yep.
Hold on, I need to minimize this. There we go. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Eric Faulkner. I'm with Weissler X-Weather. If you were on the last webinar, I was on that one too. But if you don't know me, nice to be with you all today. So as Will said, in this kind of fireside chat, what we're going for here is we're going to talk about a little bit more about emergency management and how Public Works reacts with emergencies or disasters, and really how data helps in that realm. So with us today, we have Mike Duffy, who's the Assistant Public Works Director of the City of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And as Will had already mentioned, they've been through some pretty significant emergencies over the past decade or so. And we're going to go through a few of those examples. Before I do that, I just want to give you a high-level overview if you're not as familiar with emergency management. It's kind of like a cycle here, what you see on the slide. So it starts from mitigation, trying to reduce or eliminate the risk of impacts from a natural disaster, or really any disaster, as much as you possibly can. In order to do that, you have to prepare. So there's training, excuse me. So there's training and education. Then you have the response when a disaster is occurring. So you're taking that action during and immediately following that disaster, and then you're recovering from it. So you're restoring, you're rebuilding, and then you're thinking of lessons learned for the next event. And then the cycle starts all over again. So it's really a never-ending cycle to be able to understand how you can ultimately mitigate the risk as much as possible. And Will, I think we have a poll question for this slide, correct?
I think we do, yes. Let me...
Are you able to do it while I'm sharing?
Well, let's give it a go. Are you seeing that?
Yep.
Okay. Folks, if you would, go ahead and answer the poll. And the question is, how would you rate your organization's current abilities to coordinate with emergency management agencies before, during, and after disasters? Okay, and it's a 5-pointer, very effective through very ineffective. It's one of the big issues, that communication, when it all goes in the in the bathroom, is is important. When the excrement hits the rotating object, you need to be able to communicate effectively. So we've got 25 of our 28 attendees have answered the poll. Let's end that and share the results. As you can see, most people are pretty pleased. Just under half think they're very effective in that communication, and then it's somewhat effective and neutral. Great to see that nobody finds himself in the ineffective side of things. So, there's just one question on that poll, right?
Yeah, that was it for that one. And yeah, it is really good to see that there are no ineffective responses there, because that obviously
Yep.
leads to much bigger issues.
Yep.
So we'll go quickly to the next slide here. Obviously, all kinds of different organizations deal with disasters, right? But for this specific fireside chat, we're talking about cities, communities, counties, those types of organizations. And really, the number one thing is, surrounds public safety. That's the most important, at least I think, right? You're trying to prevent loss of life. You're trying to get that information out to the public so that they are as safe as possible during whatever event is coming their way. Then you have safeguarding infrastructure, making sure that all of your infrastructure is sturdy and sound so it can withstand whatever event may happen as much as possible. That also helps with reducing costs in the long term from having to replace things or repair things. Resilience, withstanding, that goes along with safeguarding infrastructure as well. And then the ability to quickly recover. Now, some events are going to be much more severe than others. Some events are just naturally going to take longer to recover. But if you have the right programs and processes in place, it does help with that quicker recovery in the future. And then coordination is a big one too. Not only do you have to coordinate with the general public, you have to coordinate with agencies within the community or the city or county or whatever organization. But then you have to coordinate with organizations from outside, like the state or the federal government for disaster assistance and things like that. So all kinds of stuff goes into emergency management and being as prepared as you possibly can be. And Wilf, I think there's kind of a double-headed question for this slide, right? Full question.
That's right. Yeah. So here we go. A couple of questions on this. First up, what's the biggest challenge you face for an emergency response? And then the second one is, which data sources does your public works team rely on most during emergency response? So if you would, folks, go ahead and answer those questions as well as you can. And I think every organization finds itself in different places at different times. Which I guess what I'm trying to say, there is no right or wrong answer to any of these. This is just where do you find yourself? And what are the concerns that you're facing? So we're getting some great responses. Thank you, people. And I should say, and meant to say this at the beginning while people are answering this, we do have a Q&A option down below. If you have questions at any time, then stick something in the Q&A. Or if you're rather someone who wants to put it out verbally as opposed to written, raise your hand and we can then talk to you and get input that way. So, see, we've had 22 people responding and we're still going up to 23, 24. Yay. We grow. Okay, I'm going to call it and share the results. And so what we see is the big two on the biggest challenge is data integration and staff training skills. A little bit with communication and real-time data availability. And one is budget constraints. And then the data sources, what do you rely on most? Top over 50% is weather forecasts. And then sensor networks down low, GIS mapping tools are in there, and social media and public reports way down the bottom. I'm glad no one is trusting social media necessarily, but
Social media could be valuable in some instances, but there's a lot of there's a lot of garbage, I guess, that you have to filter through in order to
Yes,
get the actual truth of what's going on.
exactly. Okay, I'll get that out your way. And
Yeah, and I thought the responses to the first poll, what challenges do you face, were interesting because it kind of was all over the board. There were definitely some leaders there.
yeah,
Really widespread challenges among the participants of this fireside chat today. So that was pretty interesting.
yep.
Okay, so Mike, I'm going to pass it off to you now. This is your slide, and at first, ideally, I think it'd be good just for you to give us a background of public works within the city of Cedar Rapids, and then you're heavily involved in emergency management too, from what I understand. So how you kind of link those two together, and how you prepare and perform those operations within your role.
All right. Well, I'll start by introducing myself. So, like stated, my name is Mike Duffy. I'm from the city of Cedar Rapids, born and raised in Iowa. I start out with a background slide here of sort of what our metropolitan area looks like. So I think a lot of times when people hear of Iowa and what's going on here, they think of, the field of dreams and corn and small little communities where you pull up and somebody pumps your gas. And it's really not quite that way in Cedar Rapids. We're the second largest community within the state of Iowa. We've got some pretty advanced manufacturing. A lot of different companies are here. Very heavy in the aviation. So, Rockwell Collins and Aegon, General Mills, Cargill, very strong in corn milling and manufacturing. And when our most recent claim to fame is we've got 2 large data centers that are being built in Cedar Rapids. So that's fairly new to us, but this is a photo of our downtown area. And on the next slide here, we're going to talk a little bit about sort of my introduction to some of the events. I think there was one slide on here that had the 2008 flood.
Oh yeah, here, I'll skip to that. I think I put there. Yep.
So, I mean, when you have a river that runs through the center of your community, your most immediate threat is generally going to be a flooding. And so for us, that's where we really started our emergency management operations and our procedures. And you talk about mitigation. We didn't have a lot of that in place in 2008. We made a lot of changes and prepared later for the inevitability of flooding when you're along the river. So in 2008, we usually run about 4 or 5 foot for our river elevation. We crested at 31.12. Most of the downtown area was flooded, basically 10 blocks in either direction of the river. We had all of our city infrastructure, our public works building, all of our council chambers, federal buildings, all the schools. A lot of that was impacted because a lot of that business. You can see one of our corn milling facilities along the left side of that frame there. And then we did have one bridge collapse during that time period. One of the things that we realized very quickly during this flood was that when we do flood in Cedar Rapids, the only way across from one side of the city to the other was the I-380 interstate. And so all the bridges from downtown were impacted and closed, and people couldn't get from one side to the other. So that really created some challenges there as well. But I just kind of get started out with this as just sort of a perspective to kind of give you, where we were when we started this operation. We did initiate emergency management during this time. It was pretty heavily led by the county, not as strongly led by the city and their own incident management team. That is one thing that came out of this event, is we recognized pretty quickly that as a city, we need to really have a response that's specific to the city and not necessarily just to the county or the state. If you could flip to the next one.
Yeah, quick question for you, Mike, just on this slide too. So obviously, this is an extremely significant flood event for the city. So what have you guys done since this event to try to, I know you can't completely prevent something like this, right? But what have you guys done to try to reinforce, if you tried to reinforce infrastructure, or maybe just put better plans in place, right? How have you taken this event and, I guess, learn from it and what do you guys prepare for the next time a flood, and you may never get a flood to this significant level again, but the next time a flood happens like this, and I think there is one on the next slide, right? And maybe that's what we'll talk about here.
Yeah, that's a pretty good lead into this. So right away after the 2008 flood, one of the things that we recognized is that we were going to, receive a lot of federal dollars, but there's also going to be a lot of, homes that were impacted that just had to be simply removed. So a lot of different areas of the city that became, potentially unbuildable, but we wanted to be able to reinvest in the community. And one way that we were going to be able to do that was working with the Corps of Engineers to get a permanent flood protection put in place. So it's about $1 billion project, divided on the east side and the west side. We found that one side of the river, the east side, was pretty easily, it met all the criteria for federal funding, and we were able to get that moving pretty quickly. That's where at the time, a lot of the businesses were, city infrastructure, that sort of thing. On the west side, a lot of that became green space and were homes, and we're now starting to see a lot more development in that. So just to flash forward, 8 years, what ended up happening, the 2008 flood was our highest on record. In 2016, we got a prediction of massive flooding again due to some heavy rains up north. So we had 4 days to prepare for an event. And, as the slide indicates here, we quickly over those 4 days built 4 miles of HESCOs. We fortified manholes, so we tried to raise the manholes so that we wouldn't flood from the backside. We installed many pumps. We actually filled a lot of our heavy outflows to the river with concrete, just to kind of protect us. And then we ended up with the second highest crest, which was 22 feet. And we only had a few areas of the city that were actually flooded during that time. We were very fortunate. We call this, we look at floods from a wet flood and a dry flood perspective, which is kind of a weird way of looking at it. But the 2016 was a dry flood, meaning that we had the river come up, but we didn't have a lot of water behind, so we weren't pumping, which really helps out, as most of you know that do flood fighting. But the other thing, you talk about mitigation, this was a $1 million flood fight. And what happens in that is, you can't sustain that for very long. Every time that, it was a $10 million flood fight. So, the city ends up incurring a lot of that cost. We did get FEMA dollars, in reimbursement, but you start seeing the value of a permanent flood protection very quickly. And in 2016, we did have some of those that were in place as we started from the 2008 flood. So many of those areas that had been hardened, that were easier to protect, we had some pumps that were in place. Those sort of things really helped us out in this event. But ultimately, had we gotten rain on a 22-foot crest, we would have been pretty close to where we were in 2008.
Yeah.
And so interesting kind of depiction here, 2008 versus 2016. And obviously there was a 9-foot lower crest, but still, it's still a significant crest of the river. I thought it was interesting too, like in 2008, it sounded like it wasn't, it was actual precipitation in your area as well as maybe upstream, but 2016, it was just precipitation upstream that was causing the overflow of the river down in Cedar Rapids. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I mean, in 08, we essentially flooded from behind our flood protection.
Okay.
So what happened? I mean, we ended up having, right as we were getting close to our crest, we ended up getting some very significant rain, 4 or 5 inches of rain in a very short period of time, which is like, this is the absolute worst case scenario. And so, obviously we're not gonna be able to pump that fast. I mean, we essentially had a flash flood on top of a crest. And so, there wasn't a lot we could do in 08. In 16, we felt like we had a pretty good grasp on it. We were able to protect many of the areas that had been impacted in 08 that had seen development since. I can tell you, just the city was very nervous during that time. We felt like we were very successful in the 2016 flood. It did give a lot of, public works really came out looking like superstars during that. A lot of it just is, how the weather fell but a lot of work went into it over 4 days, but you don't always get a 4-day notice as to when you're going to flood.
exactly.
One of the
Yeah,
things that we're dealing with here over the last couple of days is we've had some pretty significant rain. Um, the worst part about it for me is the middle of the night when it's pouring down rain and you start thinking about the flash flooding, because you can close off roads, but you're really not going to be able to protect a lot of infrastructure or businesses or property during that time. Now we're in the stage where we're looking at with the river. It's a lot easier to fight the river than it is the flash flood.
yeah, we talked about the infrastructure here too, in that massive project that you guys went through after the 2008 flood to help, prevent something like that from happening as much as possible. When we, even like the rainstorm last night, right? It's pouring down rain last night. What is your indication to then go out and close roads? Do you guys use any tools, use any data specifically that helps you do that? Or when do you end up making that call?
Yeah, we have a lot of technology in place, and a lot of it, we still use a lot of just the gut and the old school sort of getting eyes on things as well. I mean, to me, you trust the technology, you believe in the technology. We've got a lot of, we're looking at flows in our sanitary system to see if we've got any infiltration there, that sort of thing. We're communicating with WPC to see what they're seeing. But then ultimately it's the police officer out on the street that's letting us know, hey, we've got flooding in this location, that sort of thing. And then we can go out and put up traffic control devices. We have a very robust app that we use that allows us to look at all of our at a given flood stage, what steps are required, what sort of things require action from, whether it's the parks department, our WPC, our water department, or our public works. And through those different stages, a lot of these things that occur early on, and even like in a 14-foot flood that we're expecting now, or a high water event, it's not really a flood, but a lot of the areas that are designed to flood will see water. And just then you get into the communication portion of that. That's letting the public know, like, that's okay, that's supposed to happen, and not to get overly worked up about it.
Yeah, and that makes complete sense, because from a weather perspective too, rain, especially summer thunderstorms, rain can be so very localized. You can get 5 inches in one spot, and 10 miles away you might get nothing too. So it's really hard to be able to try to predict that, where it's going to happen, and ultimately how that's going to affect the river levels. But it sounds like you guys have some good tools, some good programs in place to try to capture that as best as possible.
Yeah, the other thing we've used is traffic cameras, and we've actually, all the traffic cameras that we mount that are along intersections along the river have the ability to sort of pan out, and we have them, like, it's saved, so we can go to river monitoring, and all the cameras can then go and look at the river at different locations throughout the downtown. We can then train them on intersections, so we know, as you're sitting in your dry living room, if an intersection's flooding someplace and causing you problems, because 74 square miles of city, it's a lot of ground to cover, and the conditions can vary over that entire city.
So
and
following up,
I don't want to cut you off the conversation.
no, I just wondered, Mike, you raised that point that you've got a lot of ground to cover. Do you have locations that serve as, if you will, triggers for you? If there's a problem at this intersection, we may be seeing them elsewhere, or that may be an omen of bad things to come. Or is each time different?
It kind of depends on what we're looking at from an emergency. Later in the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about the derecho, which is an animal all to itself. But whenever we experience flash flooding, we have areas that we know take a lot of water, and we see those areas impacted very quickly. So we tend to monitor them. We have an area called the Bin Ditch, which then feeds into the cedar, but it'll turn into a small creek or almost like a river at some points during these events. So we watch those areas quickly. We did have an event in 2014 that was a flash flood event, where it sort of just came up on us very quickly. We had a lot of pavements that were washed out. We actually had a fatality from that. We had 2 young kids that were washed into a culvert. So just reminding the public not to get around those areas is very important. But those are areas that we know, take a lot of water, and it can really pose a threat to the public. So we're really trying to communicate, not getting into those areas, not playing in the river, the Vin ditch, not just a ditch, those kind of things, and just communicating the best that we can.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, I'm going to transition now to the derecho back in August of 2020. So, Mike, you'll go into this in much more detail, but I'll just give the audience kind of a high level overview of what happened here. So if you don't know what a derecho is, it's a very widespread, strong wind event with a complex of thunderstorms that develops and moves over a very large area. So this happened, this event really stretched from South Dakota, Nebraska, all the way into eastern Indiana before it started dissipating. So there was widespread wind for hundreds of miles. The most severe part of this derecho, unfortunately for Mike in the city of Cedar Rapids, really impacted right in the area. That's where they saw the highest wind gusts, from about 100 to up to 140 miles per hour, which after reading about this a little bit more and watch a documentary on it too, it is the strongest recorded, at least we're aware, the strongest recorded derecho in history of the U.S. So just some stats here. We had about 65% of the city, this is Cedar Rapids, the city of Cedar Rapids tree canopy completely gone. Thousands of homes and businesses were damaged or destroyed. Some were without power for more than 2 weeks. The communication infrastructure was severely damaged. You can see that's a radio tower in that image that was knocked down by the strong winds. And then across Iowa, and I think this was some of the other states as well, but you had 10 million acres of corn and soybeans completely flattened. And unfortunately, there were 4 fatalities across the state of Iowa. And in total for this event, you had over $11 billion in damage, which was the highest damage total for any thunderstorm event in the U.S. So as Mike said, this was a completely different animal. And I'm really curious, Mike, since you went through it, to get your perspective on leading up to the event, what it was like during the event, and what you guys managed to do afterward. And I'll flip off this slide, and I'll flip to, we'll start with this one.
Yeah. So, first off, we had some unique things that were going on during this time period. I mean, if you'll remember, this is right in the middle of COVID.
That's right.
So operationally, we had our staff here. We were working a reduced staff because we didn't have like seasonal employees and that sort of thing, but we were still running full construction schedule. August 10th, 2020 was a sunny day. We had a lot of work planned that day. Crews were out in the field. Strangely enough, we're coming up on our 5-year anniversary of this event. But I can tell you that it was, it was very strange because, like I said, we started out the day very clear. We're out working. We've got asphalt ordered. We've got the paver moving. And then, I remember looking off to the west, and I was on the phone actually with my wife at the time, and she was getting ready to go out for a walk. And I was like, yeah, that doesn't look good over there. I mean, it was just, we really didn't have any indication that we had a storm. I know our emergency management people indicated that they did sound the alarms, but I don't recall ever hearing them. I mean, there was so much going on that day with radio traffic and stuff. But I told her, I'm like, probably not a good day for a walk. And I immediately, I've never seen it that dark that quickly. Immediately took off for the shop in my vehicle, and a lot of our staff were doing the same. Essentially, it came on us so fast that for the most part, most of our staff actually spent the duration of this derecho in the field, in their vehicles or out under equipment, that sort of thing. The highest recorded wind gust that the fire department indicated was in Cedar Rapids was 144 mile an hour. This thing lasted for 45 minutes. Like you had mentioned, most of the trees came down very quickly. And it was just completely blackout condition. You would have thought it was, middle of the night. I mean, it just got dark, and very scary event. I don't know. I think part of it was related to it being during COVID, that just there were so many people that were working from home that were able to shelter in place, that there wasn't a lot or more fatalities involved in this. But it moved very quickly, 45 minutes. And then afterwards, we got some pretty heavy rain. And then, immediately started in on response. The thing that I remember from this event too, and it's, as you start evaluating sort of what a response is going to look like to an event like this, we didn't realize what the magnitude of this was at the time. You can see what's happening around you. So we had, gas lines were going off. There were fires all over the city. Power's out to everything. There was actually no power that was actually coming into Cedar Rapids. All the main transponders and the main lines that were coming into the city were all down. So all the power lines that were laying were dead, but you don't know that. So you're not really, you're having to be very careful around those. We're in a community that has trees that were, some of these trees are 300 years old, and they didn't hold up to that wind very, very well. They came down. And so a lot of the debris that was in the street had to be dealt with. Our initial concern was accountability and figuring out where our people were. And without radios, that was very difficult to really discern. Most of our staff, we got them back to the shop. It took, a couple of hours because of the amount of debris. If the traffic signals were working on generator backup, they were usually facing the wrong direction. We did have a lot of that was going on. Signs were knocked down. People very quickly started getting out into the community to go check on loved ones because they weren't able to, communicate with them by radio or phone or watch TV or to see what was going on. So there's just a lot of confusion. The first thing, the action that we took, just because it was the best thing that we could come up with at the time, was to put our snowplow equipment on and go out and run snow routes. And so once we got staff in, we realized that this event actually impacted the entire city. So all 74 square miles of our community were impacted. Many of the trees, if they weren't knocked down completely, were damaged. Power lines were down everywhere. There was a lot of roofs taken off of homes. The other thing that was, was interesting in this event is there's a real dedication in Public Works to service, and I certainly saw that during this event. All of our employees that were in knew that their homes were damaged because they could see all the other homes that were damaged, but yet they, went out there and did their job, did their routes. The one thing that was unique in this is that because there was no power, there was no lights at night. We made the decision very quickly not to fight this thing at night. So everybody went home, and we just came back the next day and started over.
Yeah, I mean, this was essentially like Iowa's version of a major hurricane, with the extent of the severity of the winds. I mean, 120 to 140 miles per hour is a major hurricane, and moving over, that large of a swath for, a major city like Cedar Rapids is kind of insane. And it's great that everybody on your crew was safe, even though a lot of them, it sounds like, had to, because of the little warning, had to kind of deal with it in their cars or out in the field. But it's very interesting to hear a little bit more about someone that was on the ground there, what occurred, and what the response was afterward. I'm going to go into the next slide, Mike, if you want to talk a little bit about this, because when I read through this, I thought this was kind of mind-boggling, the amount of calls and everything that came in after the event.
Yeah. So Eric, Mike, before we get into that, there is a question from Howard Brandt who says, obviously you lost communications, but as it came back, what was your main source of wireless communications? How long was your system out? How long was your internet connectivity out? You lost those things. How long was it before you got them back?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what we did is we have a little bit of redundancy built into our system. So our Public Works system and our fire and PD are on separate towers. So our tower for Public Works went down. And so what we ended up doing was I met a police officer in the back lot. He actually handed me his handheld walkie-talkie, and we started running across police officers, and we were doing the same thing with others. So Public Works started taking handhelds from police and fire so that we could then get ahead of them to respond to a lot of these fires and calls. Otherwise, that was our communication with them. So when we heard a call going out about a fire someplace or somebody trapped in a building, we sent a truck or an end loader or a motor grader, whatever we had that was big enough to push trees out of the way that direction. And we were out. So interestingly enough, when all the power lines go down, this was another challenge that we had. As they started to reestablish power, then we started to lose internet. Which was a big deal for a lot of people that worked from home during that time, or that we were using our, for internet connectivity, being able to document the event, that sort of thing with our staff, because a lot of those cables and that are on those power lines, the companies that were out there were putting their power back up, but the media companies were not. And so even though initially I remember there was a lot of, once the power came on, we had internet connection. And then pretty quickly we lost a lot of that because the power companies just took those poles down, put new ones up, ran power to it, and then took off. Well, that left the MediaCom and them out in the cold on that. They didn't have service at that point. But yeah, I mean, power was out for 10 days for most of the city.
Wow.
So to that point too, Mike, like what was the communication you had with the power company and the relationship that you guys have with them to try to get power restored back to the city? I mean, I know they handle that, but did you guys help them? Did you have any input on that? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, so what we did initially is we put crews with the power company so that they were able to get to the areas that they needed to put power back up to their main lines to get sort of some infrastructure back into place. We thought the best course for doing that would be just to assign them some assets so they could get stuff out of the way and put power poles up where they needed to. Yeah, so we would have daily meetings. We had our incident management team fired up on day one, and we started, inviting all those partners in. We had a lot of people that were displaced, so trying to get, Red Cross and that set up as well. The other thing that was really interesting to me during this event is I never really thought of the impacts of power loss from a medical standpoint. So people that are on devices that need to be recharged on a daily basis. So we ended up, setting up power stations. We ended up setting up portable facilities as far as like cell phone providers. They would come in and come online and set up these little portable stations everywhere so people could get in contact. There were some really good things that came out of this too. One of the things that we put in place was a PACT program. So it's a neighborhood PACT. So we could it's an acronym for Prepare, Act, Communicate, and Train. And really what that's envisioned to do is let neighbors and residents know that when something like this happens, they're going to be on their own for a while. And so to be able to prepare for that ahead of that. So having the disaster kit at home, ways to light your home, if they're just flashlights and that sort of thing. Being able to act and get out there in the community and help each other. So we've really been able to do that. The other thing that we really stressed during this program is a way to communicate with family members in the community to let them know that you're okay when you don't have the ability to just pick up the phone. So that's sort of neighborhood community outreach and that sort of thing to be able to do that. And then we ended up really running into some real language barriers, things that we didn't realize were going to be such a problem. And so being able to get into some translator software and things like that allowed us to better communicate out to the public, because a lot of people get real used to getting their news and their information off of either a text message or something that occurs on a news broadcast. Those weren't options during this. So we ended up putting out newsletters and putting resource centers together. That was our initial sort of response to getting people to be able to communicate and get information out.
Yeah, I mean, given the severity of the event, it sounds like you guys still did a really good job at communicating. Go ahead, Will.
I was going to say we had a couple of follow-up questions. One was, did the P25 networks stay active during the event, or was it radio to radio?
So I think is the P25, is that referring to the cell phone priority? I think that's what that is referring to. We did have access to that. They did come in pretty quickly and set that up. It took a little bit of time. A lot of those that were on towers were on battery backup. Those would be sort of intermittent because as generators went dead and that sort of thing with fuel, trying to get those. But for the most part, a lot of our communication ended up being cell phones through that emergency network.
And then have you purchased a Starlink system for backup?
No.
No. Okay. Thanks. Those are follow-up questions, just these are the details. These are things that really matter. I didn't know about the P25, so that wasn't my question. That was somebody else knows a lot more than me. So anyway.
Yeah, that's one thing. If you haven't looked into that, if we're referring to the same thing here, I mean, we have a couple different providers for cell phone service, and they all have sort of this emergency backup where they have a priority usage for a list of people that you put on there. So like our entire incident management team is on that, so that we have the ability to communicate. Most police officers, fire, and public works end up on that.
Cool. Thank you. So sorry, I keep interrupting you, Mike. There's great info here. This is good.
Yes. I guess talking about the initial response, I mean, that was really sort of where we're at, making things safe, intersections, getting traffic control devices put back up. We didn't have power. We lost all of the intersections as far as power to those intersections. We just didn't have enough generators to man those. You're not going to also be able to go out and put up stop signs at those. So, people don't remember from driving 101 that if they approach an intersection and the lights are out, that you're supposed to stop. We had a lot of traffic accidents related to that. The public safety stats that are up here, what was really interesting is the amount of calls for service that came right at the event. The other thing that, as the days progressed on this, the public safety stats continued to increase, and so did the number of injuries and the severity of the injuries, because now you've got chainsaws in people's hands that aren't familiar with them. We actually sent a couple people right after this event as far north as they could go until they could find chainsaws, and they came back with a truckload from Minnesota because we didn't have enough to really deal with this event either. So, getting those resources together very quickly. And when you're dealing with an event like this that goes across the state, we had to, really rely on our northern and southern partners and jurisdictions in this, because everybody was sort of impacted by this. And it's, and if you look on that, on a map, and if you're in the Des Moines area and you had 100-mile-an-hour winds, you've got a lot of trees down, a lot of damage, a lot of scrambling. But it was nothing compared to what we had when you had 140-mile-an-hour winds in the Cedar Rapids area. So just trying to communicate with each other and get that sort of a perspective of what that looks like, and really triage the event was important. Into the next stage, I guess, is how we started to recover from that. We had to get all the streets open. We had to make things safe. And we knew that we were going to have to document very quickly how much material we were hauling. We also knew that we weren't going to be able to do it ourselves. We had a lot of help from the state DOT. Other cities came to help us out. We were hauling material ourselves, but our dump trucks just aren't really equipped for that. So what we ended up doing is contracting with an emergency response crew that usually does hurricane cleanup in the Florida and those sort of areas. And one of the interesting things in talking to him is he said, the level of damage in the Cedar Rapids area compared to like a cleanup or a response in like Florida after a hurricane, they don't have the type of trees that have, not seen a wind event like that for 300 years. And so it was a very slow process for them, but they were committed, and And we ended up setting up 8 collection debris sites, over 93 acres of area that we filled full of broken trees and debris. We had 42 or 4.2 million cubic yards of material that we ended up collecting and then having to process. And it's really sad to see, because I mean, a lot of these trees, initially we thought, well, we could get some crews in and they, that salvage the lumber, but because of the amount of damage and the winds, it actually twisted the wood. And so as they set up some of their mills and tried to salvage some of that material, they found out very, very quickly that just wasn't going to work out. There was just so much force left in that wood. So most of it ended up getting turned to mulch.
Wow.
One thing you mentioned too, Mike, which I kind of thought about here, was you said you lost a lot of your signs, right, during the storm event. How did you know, like, which ones were missing? Like, did you have an inventory ahead of time where you could just go back and say, oh, we're missing the stop sign at this intersection, or we're missing this street sign here, and this is what it was? Like, how did you manage that?
Yeah, so that's another interesting point. So one of the things that we got pretty good at after the flooding events is sort of we did make an investment in our GIS staff and our abilities there. So we created dashboards that allow us to show what our response looks like, communicate that, and push that out to the public. So within our dashboards, we created the same thing during the derecho. We knew that we were going to collect all the material. So we weren't just going to worry about what happened in the right of way. We were going to let everybody bring everything to the street. And we also knew that there was so much of it that we weren't going to be able to just do it all in a single pass. And so we set up a dashboard. We had the contractor weighing the material, showing what their routes were, the number of trucks, where we'll predict pretty quickly, what route we were going to be on what day, what pass we were on, how many times we were going to go back. We ended up going back through these areas 5 or 6 different times before we ended up getting all the debris collected. But it allowed the public to know sort of, hey, we're in the area, get all your stuff out. And then once that area is collected, here's where you are in the rotation. We'll be back on this date. Because it's one of those deals like where you're plowing snow and somebody pushed snow out into the road. You don't go back and get it. It's the next pass, or somebody's got a car and they move it. You don't just keep circling around. We just started going down the street, picking up material. And we did have to prioritize that, obviously. I mean, you're pulling material off your busiest streets first. You're trying to get some connections back to hospitals, schools, that sort of thing. Large business centers, our downtown. And then just try and do that throughout the entire community.
So, Mike, things, obviously the trees were going to be a huge part of your debris problem, but I would imagine there were things like destroyed cars, some building materials that were all over the place, all of that sort of thing. Was it an issue separating out all of that, or was it something you sort of figured out pretty quickly? Oh, this is how we're going to do it.
No, we had to communicate that out very quickly, because we could not collect debris that was combined. So it had to be separated, and it had to be tracked separately too. So all the material that was coming out that was tree damage was out on the right of way. We did have areas that then we had piles, and we just had people separate those. Our solid waste division stepped up, working with them. They were responsible for that type of debris. And then our crews were responsible for the tree removal. One of the other things that we had put in place after a 2016 event was, our continuity of service. So we call it our COOP model. So it's our continuity of operations plan. So it's, what services have to be maintained, and one of those is trash collection. So even after the event, even if the trucks couldn't get down the street, we had to set up those refuse collection sites so that we could get that cleaned up. Otherwise, you start dealing with heat and other emergencies related to debris.
Yeah. Wow. So lessons learned from that, as we were talking before we began here today. Just a couple of days ago, there was another derecho, not nearly as bad, but up north, maybe 100 miles north of you. God forbid it ever happened again, but what lessons have you learned from it that you would take if it did happen again?
Well, for me, I've kind of resolved to the fact that it'll never happen again in my lifetime because we'll never have the trees that we had before the event.
Right.
But I think one of the things that, you know, even when we've had the high wind events over the last couple days, you know, a lot of the if a tree was damaged 5 years ago, it's probably dying or dead at this point. And
Yeah.
so we're still dealing with it on a regular basis. I mean, the year after this, just to kind of give you some numbers, we removed 10,000 stumps just from the right of way. And so that was something that we did as an undertaking as well. We couldn't replant. And we've, you know, that's the other portion of this recovery is, you know, we've received a number of grants and we're planting trees throughout the community. But rather than, you know, you can't put a tree back where a stump was, but you don't want to put some nice tree out someplace and then have that ugly stump next to it. So we decided as a community, we were, you know, as a public works department, we were going to go out there and remove those. So we, you know, got into the stump business. We went out and bought a couple different pieces of equipment. We trained up staff, and then we just worked around the clock getting stumps gone so that we could start the recovery process and get trees growing as quickly as possible, knowing that they take a long time. As far as, you know, think lessons that we learned, we have a collection app, Survey 123 we use that we go out and we, you know, you mentioned the sign inventory. We did have a sign inventory, so we knew exactly where all the signage had been prior to the event. We were able to go out there and locate those and then put the signs back. Most of the stuff that we use is Telespar, so if the sign was down, we were able to put a new sign up fairly quickly. But really, signals were our immediate priority, making sure that we had traffic signals up and going. Because once you get a road clear, you just get that congestion level. There's people going to help people. That's the way we looked at it. And, you know, there's just a lot of traffic out there, and it doesn't help when it's everybody's at a four-way stop.
Yeah.
So, Mike, what about on the advanced warning side of this? Because it sounds like, you know, based on what you were saying in the beginning, that a lot of you were caught off guard and you didn't really have a lot of time to get indoors. You had mentioned some of your guys were out in their trucks, just, you know, sitting through the storm in their trucks. Have you, I mean, maybe you have something like this now, or maybe did at the time, I don't know, but have you looked into any type of advanced warning systems on the weather side to be able to get more notice ahead of time, just for even public safety purposes?
Yeah, we have. We've had a couple different conversations about that. We tend to use the National Weather Service information at this point. We don't have a specific service that we subscribe to. I think the other thing that we've really made some changes to is, you know, we see ourselves as first responders. And so during an event like this, you know, having never heard of what a derecho was, we didn't know what the impacts were going to be like. I mean, typically when a storm comes through, you take shelter, you go back out and you clean up the debris.
Sure.
I think one of the things that, you know, after this, one of the lessons that we've learned is we have a lot of people that, you know, it's almost like a form of PTSD, having been out in an event like this, that you know, when the skies start getting dark, you know, you can see the anxiety start to rise, and you know, just get a little bit more uncomfortable around storms than they used to be. So we take that very seriously. We do have a lot of training that we talk about. So when we hear about an event like today, you know, we've got directly outside my door, there's probably 14 computers doing safety training, because, you know, we're not going to have our staff out, you know, in an event that, you know, we know we're not going to be that productive out there on a rain day anyway, but just trying to keep them safe.
So the you know, losing your communications for the most part, obviously there was still something going on, but not nearly as much as you would have liked. And obviously we're now 5 years later. There are newer technologies, but they all need power. And if you lose the power, you lose them. Are you seeing anything that you think would be more helpful to you going forward on the communication side of things?
Yeah, I mean, I think building redundancy into any system that you have, being able to communicate is very important during an event. But also being able to communicate before an event. So, and we've learned this lesson. We apply it a lot to snow events. So when you develop a plan, you know what you're going to do during a snow event. You know where your areas are, but it's not just good enough to have that plan with your staff. You really need to communicate that out to the public officials who are taking a lot of those phone calls, as well as the public, and using social media, being able to get that information out. One of the things that occurred that was sort of, a problem for us is, everybody is, wanted to have the National Guard on the ground and working through this, and, I spent some time on active duty in the military, and I was a member of the National Guard after getting out of the service. And I could tell you that they just are not, lumberjacks. I mean, they've got a very specific mission that they're trained for, and removing trees is typically not one of them.
Right.
They were very helpful. They did bring in a lot of equipment, but that equipment's, for a different theater than what they were experiencing here. And so, knowing that now, we communicate that to our public officials. They have a role, certainly. There's some things that they're very good at, but they weren't going to come in and save the city of Cedar Rapids. That's just not how that, typically works.
Right. And in terms of, that communication with the public, I know in Iowa, back in sort of March, April time, we go through the tornado preparedness. Has the city thought about a derecho preparedness? Because as you've talked today, this is the comparison to a hurricane was very real, especially in terms of the debris. You didn't get the storm surge, thank God, but everything else pretty much you had. Do you do special information on those things to the public, or do you just lump it all in with thunderstorms?
We lump it in with thunderstorms. I mean, the derecho, at least my understanding of the definition of a derecho is a just a really extreme thunderstorm with straight line winds, for a prolonged period of time over a large area. So we really do a lot of communication around what that is. So when when you hear the alarms, the other thing that we do is just anytime we have any sort of event that could cause an impact to the community, we try and show that we're out ahead of that we are monitoring the situation, that we have staff that are going to respond, and that we're prepared for it. And we communicate that out to the public.
I'm going to share this really quick, Wilf, just for
Sure.
call here. Make sure you guys can see it. Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay, so this is the frequency, just for others, because I don't know where everybody else is on the call here. This is the frequency of how often derechos occur across the U.S. So if you're in the West Coast or Florida, you're safe. You're probably but the bullseye kind of here, well, there's really two separate bullseyes, and the red areas mean once per year, essentially, that a derecho is likely to occur. So eastern Iowa is probably once every couple of years, but once you get into the Midwest here, Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, and then down here in Oklahoma and parts of Arkansas and Missouri as well, they're very prone to derechos. So this is a cool little story map, actually, that was done. I can share this link if anyone's interested in taking a look at it. But I just thought that was kind of interesting to see the typical timeline between derechos across the U.S.
Yeah. And I guess, again, to build on what Mike said, there was, this was one of the more severe derechos. This was the Category 5 type of derecho rather than a Category 1. And not that any of them are anything to take lightly, but I'm just going to wrap us up here, and because we are getting to the end of our time. And huge thank you to Mike for doing this. I know, having to relive this again and again for other people so we can learn from the experience isn't necessarily nice, but thank you very much for doing that. And let's just put this up and move us through. Encourage you, if you have any interest in visiting professionalsnowfightersassociation.org and joining up. And our next webinar is going to be on technology debt, same time, August 13th, 2025. And you'll be getting more info soon. And here is connection information, the emails for Nicole, Eric, Mike, and myself. And I'm seeing one more thing. We have something in the question from Brand to comment. Thank you. Great subject. I would agree very much with that. Really appreciate the input. Mike, thank you for sharing. I know it's painful, but by sharing, you help all those other agencies out there. So that's huge and very valuable for us all. So again, big thank you to everybody. Take care. Hope you don't have to deal with a derecho, but if you do, you're better prepared now. So again, big thank you all.
Thanks. Mike. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you for the invite. That was fun.
Well, I get the trauma too, but yeah, fun.
Yeah, it's kind of weird when I start talking about it, even when we've been doing a lot of media here recently with with the anniversary coming up. It's hard to get I can feel it in my voice sometimes. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
it's a lot.
Yeah. Well, cross fingers and hope, and no doubt see you soon at PWX, if not before. So
I'll be there. See you then.
All right. Thanks
All right.
to you all, and a record will be available, so we'll get that out there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Goodbye.